So you may have noticed, if you follow the channel anyway, that I've started creating what I'm calling the cosmic lie. So I'm diving into areas such as our DNA, the fact that we've potentially been an experiment, who's done it, the missing link, you know, all these kind of subjects it's intrigued me since I was a child. You know, look, for over 150 years or so, we've been fed the same story about where we come from. You've got this Darwin's theory of evolution, you know, that we're taught in schools, and natural selection. You've got random mutations, ape to man, and it's obviously it's everywhere. It's in our textbooks, it's in museums, it's in the TV documentaries that we see. So we're fed this stuff, and it's presented as fact. There's no theory behind it. This is not a suggestion or something that's up for debate. You know, it is the fact. It is what we have to believe, or we're told we have to believe. But obviously, over the number of years of sort of waking up to this crazy realm that we're in, I think we have to question everything. So the way I'm looking at this at the moment is that what we're being fed is a story, isn't it? You know, it's a beginning and the end of the human origins, and for me, it doesn't truly add up. There's things missing. You know, if you look closely, and we start to really examine sort of the cracks that's within this theory. So we're told that evolution is slow and gradual, and that tiny random mutations over a million of years stacked up into the complexity of what we are as human beings today. But if we take a serious look at the fossil records, I mean, what do we actually find? And that's gaps, it seems to be, you know, huge gaps, entire chapters of missing links that never existed. It's got to be questioned, I think, really. So take the Cambrian Explosion as an example. So we're told that 500 million years ago, life on Earth suddenly went from simple organisms to this incredible, I should say, diversity of complex species, which we are. We are a very complex species. You know, we're fully formed with no slow transition and no step-by-step crawl. So boom, in a way, just like that. That doesn't sound like a gradual evolution to me. There's something different, something strange going on. It sounds like something or someone has maybe flipped a switch, and that's what I want to question, really. So even apparently, this is what I've been looking into and what I've been reading, even mainstream scientists have admitted this, that, you know, there's papers that are written that are saying Darwin's model can't actually explain these leaps. But those kind of voices, as we know in this world, this realm we're in, these kind of voices will get buried, they'll get sidelined, they'll get ridiculed. I'm sure I'll get ridiculed on this video. You know, I'm sure that there'll be plenty of people ready to stick their oar in as they do. And the question why on that is because the entire modern worldview of science, history, politics, even religion, it rests on keeping this one story intact. You think about that for a minute. You know, we are accidents. That we are just animals who's climbed a ladder, if you like. That we're products of a chance in this meaningless universe. It doesn't add up to me. I don't feel meaningless. I don't know about you. And if that story, that this Darwinism, this story falls apart, if we're not random accidents, which I don't believe we are, then the whole control system cracks as well, doesn't it? It would mean something or someone has played a role in shaping us. And suddenly, questions about who we are, what we're capable of, where we're going, now suddenly that can't be ignored. So here's where things get maybe a little bit uncomfortable, because the official story of history doesn't just have gaps, it's been actively censored, you know, his story. As an example, in 1889, there's a little clay figurine now called the Nampa figurine, which was pulled up from a borehole in Idaho. And the depth was over 300 feet underground. The soil layer it came from was dated to be millions of years old. And yet, this figurine looked like something carved by human hands, really. It's a figurine of a woman. It's delicate and intentional design. So it wasn't some random rock or a natural erosion. And interestingly, mainstream science, as they would, dismissed it, they ridiculed it, and they've just buried it. Because if humans or something human-like existed millions of years ago, the Darwinian timeline obviously collapses, doesn't it? And from my research recently, this Nampa figurine is not an isolated case either. You know, I've been listening a lot to Michelle Gibson, as I hope anyone who comes across this video has been listening to Michelle Gibson. Also, her research is unbelievable, off the scale. So we've got giant skeletons unearthed all across America in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And Smithsonian researchers were often called in to investigate, and then the bones vanished. So newspapers at the time apparently reported these finds, and skeletons that were 8, 9, even 12 feet tall, entire burial mounds of them. And then silence, official denial, you know, it's just disappeared. A bit like the blueprints for the moon landing. Anyway, but why erase this? Because, obviously, for me, any of it, obviously, giant skeletons point directly to what the Book of Enoch and the countless indigenous traditions have always said, that humanity once lived alongside beings who were not like us. So the Book of Enoch obviously describes the Nephilim, the giants, the hybrids. And this would be evidence that our history isn't a clean, straight line, but a tangled story involving different species, different interventions, maybe even different creators. So let's be honest, if these skeletons were made public, if the Nampa figurine had been celebrated instead of hidden, the whole educational structure would have to change overnight. Yeah, think about that one. Museums would have to rip down their displays. Everything changes. Scientists would have to admit they've been lying, or at best propping up a story that doesn't hold. And it's not just the bones and figurines either. It's, you know, across the world we find these megalithic structures that make zero sense on an official timeline anyway. Pyramids, stone spheres, obelisks. You know, they've been deliberately buried to hide the truth. Structures built with precision tools we supposedly didn't have until thousands of years later. So the question becomes, who's editing history then? Why does the official story need to be so neat? And what are they so desperate to hide? And here's a part that gets me. It really, I mean, I'm no expert on any of this, to be honest with you. I'm just looking into it and I'm questioning it. But our DNA. Because even if we ignore the archaeology, even if we throw out every giant skeleton and buried artifact, the code inside ourselves is telling a story that really shouldn't be ignored. You know, mainstream science says that we're the product of random mutations over millions of years. But when geneticists actually looked at our DNA, they found something that doesn't fit the model of slow, gradual evolution. They found what looks like sudden editing. And one of the most famous examples is the chromosome 2. So humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Our closest primate relatives, the chimpanzees, gorillas, etc., they have 24. So what happened? Somewhere in our past, 2 chromosomes are fused together into one. And what I've been reading into, it doesn't look like it's some kind of messy, random way either, but a clean, surgical splice, if you like. Like someone has literally cut and pasted the code of our DNA together. I don't know. I'm like I say, I'm no expert, but this kind of fusion seems to have given us advantages over the primates. You know, we have more complex language, higher abstract thoughts, etc., etc. So it's, you know, those traits that make us human rather than animal. So we've got a choice, I suppose. Do we believe this was just blind luck, this cosmic accident that's rewired us into the species that built cities and technology? Or do we consider the possibility that someone or something has intervened? And it's not just chromosome 2 either. When you look deeper into our DNA, we start to see evidence of foreign sequences as well, genetic code that looks like it was inserted. Scientists even call them endogenous retroviruses, which are fragments that don't belong, but are now part of us. So are these fingerprints of our supposed gods, the Anunnaki, the beings of Enoch's story? Were we upgraded, maybe, or shackled, possibly? Because there's a disturbing thought in this. If our DNA was edited once, what's to stop it being edited again? And this is why I want to tie this series in somehow, because it seems to me we're heading into another realm. Well, we definitely are, for me. When you think about the medical interventions that's been happening recently, you know, they've already openly talked about therapies that alter DNA. You've got the gene editing, obviously the CRISPR technology. So, as I've said, if you've been paying attention over these past few years, you'll have seen how these certain interventions were rushed out with very little testing and told it was for our health, for our survival. So ask yourself this: is this about healing? Or is this about rewriting the human template again? It certainly raises a chilling possibility, because I had considered in 2020 that this is some kind of soul test. I was never going to take this medical intervention, and I desperately tried to stop my friends and loved ones and to not have it, because there was more to it than this, and more to it even the fact that it could be dangerous on a physical sense. There was something more in my being that was telling me that this is wrong. So the question I have there then is, has humanity itself always been a genetic project? You know, are we an experiment? So it seems that we're a species that's been tweaked, edited and programmed. And has this been done by outside forces then? If so, are we actually evolving naturally then? Or are we being steered? Are we being steered into something? So that's a bit of a genetic puzzle in itself. You know, it's basically one piece of a much bigger picture, and a picture that would link, it would actually link archaeology, myth, and the hidden hand shaping our destiny. It would link them all together, and that's, I suppose, in a way, is where I'm trying to take this series that I'm going to dive into. So, if the DNA was the invisible code, then maybe the Earth itself holds the visible evidence of that. And looking into it, this is where the cracks in the Darwinian story really start to show, because over the last 2 centuries, countless discoveries have surfaced, and just as quickly as they've been surfaced, they've been buried again, probably literally as well. So we'll start with the giant skeletons that have been found all across North America. You know, reports, as mentioned before, surfaced in the 1800s and early 1900s of skeletons measuring 7, 8, 10 feet tall, and newspapers at the time. So you had the New York Times, the San Diego Union, and countless other local papers carried about these headlines about unearthed giants found in burial mounds and riverbanks and caves. Some of these reports were so widespread that the Smithsonian Institution itself then got involved. And this is when the skeletons now are nowhere to be found today. So you bring in an official line and all of a sudden they disappear. You know, so we're told that they were either mismeasured, misidentified, or they were lost. Lost. Yeah. So the Smithsonian, they're an institution whose sole purpose is to preserve history. And somehow they lose dozens of skeletons that would rewrite human history. Right. That clearly is not an accident. That's a cover-up. Gotta be, hasn't it? And it's not just giants. So let's look again at this Nampa figurine that was discovered in Idaho in 1889. It's a tiny clay doll, and it was pulled from 300 feet underground in deposits dated to be over 2 million years old. If those dates are even close to accurate, then humans, or something very much like us, existed long before mainstream science says we should have. Then there's the London hammer, which was found in Texas, encased in rock that dates back 400 million years. 400 million years. It was a human-made tool in stone, older than the dinosaurs. How do you explain that? And you can't unless you admit that history is far more complex than the textbooks are saying. Then in South Africa, Michael Tellinger has shown stone circles and artifacts suggesting advanced civilizations there stretching back over 200,000 years. Not hunter-gatherers, but builders, miners, possibly linked to, the very Anunnaki stories of Sumeria. Now, we can dismiss one or two of these anomalies as mistakes, but when you put them together across continents and centuries, there's a bit of a pattern that seems to be emerging. A story, even, that's saying that we've been here longer. And that story is suggesting we're bigger and we're far more advanced than we're told, So, again, question. Why do we not know this? Because if these artifacts were accepted, Darwin's slow linear story is collapsing again. The whole foundation of modern science and history would have to be rebuilt. And the powers that be, from academic institutions to political elites, they're not interested in that. I wonder why. So instead, what we see is systematic suppression. These artifacts would just vanish. Where's Indiana Jones when you need him? Sites get reclassified. Discoveries are dismissed as hoaxes, even when they're backed by evidence. And here's where Michelle Gibson research starts to tie in. She's shown how history itself has been rewritten, even in more recent times. Entire civilizations erased, timelines manipulated, architecture rebranded. When you see how thoroughly the record has been scrubbed in just the last few centuries alone, is it really so hard to believe it's been happening for millennia? So then the question becomes, why? Why the lie? Why keep humanity in the dark about its true past? And the reason is because people cut off from their origins are easy to control. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. And the ones who do know, the architects behind the curtain, well, they can write the script for us, can't they? Now, if archaeology gives us the bones and tools, the Book of Enoch gives us the story. It's one of the most suppressed texts in human history. And I question the reason why for that as well. For centuries it was excluded from the Bible, dismissed as apocrypha, hidden from public view. And you have to ask yourself why. Enoch, according to scripture, was the great-grandfather of Noah. But his book, rediscovered in Ethiopia in the 18th century, doesn't tell a family tale. It reveals a cosmic war. He describes the Watchers, these angels who descended to earth, saw the daughters of men and took them as wives. So from these unions came the Nephilim, giants, men of renown who devoured the earth and taught forbidden knowledge. And this knowledge was weapons, sorcery, astrology, knowledge that was never meant for humanity in its infancy. So think about that for a moment. The Book of Enoch is describing genetic hybridization. Spit my words out. Beings from heaven crossing with humanity, producing offspring, unlike either parent. Doesn't that sound a lot like the stories from Sumeria as well? The Anunnaki coming down from the sky, creating humanity through genetic manipulation. So we've got different traditions, different languages, but the same core story. And that story is we were interfered with. It wasn't just the children of the Watchers. Enoch describes how these beings corrupted humanity itself, teaching us war, blood sacrifice, and technology that we were not ready for. Nothing's changed either when you look at the world today. Humanity became enslaved to knowledge without wisdom, and that's dangerous. Because the result of that is chaos, violence, a world so corrupted that eventually, with a reset, it had to be wiped clean in the flood, according to the stories. So no wonder the early church fathers wanted this book gone. If the Book of Enoch is true, or even partly true, it shatters the sanitized biblical story. It says humanity's suffering wasn't just our own fall from grace, it was the result of outside interference. Now let's connect this back to the evidence, the giant skeletons, these sudden jumps in human DNA, the myths of gods descending from the skies. Everywhere you look, it seems to echo this story of Enoch. And this is a part I find quite striking as well. In Enoch's vision, these watchers were judged. They were condemned for what they did. They were cast down and chained, awaiting their fate, yet their influence remains. Their children roamed the earth, and their teachings lived on in secret cults, in empires, in bloodlines. And isn't that exactly what we see today? We have these so-called elites who wield knowledge and technology not for liberation, but for control. Occult rituals carried out in plain sight, from Hollywood to political ceremonies. The same forbidden knowledge recycled for a new age. Nothing's changed. The Book of Enoch may not be literal, I'm pretty sure it's not in the modern sense, but as a myth, it carries truth. It might not be fact, but it's true. There's a warning, and that warning is that humanity's story has always been entangled with beings who do not have our best interests at heart. And unless we remember that, unless we reclaim our own sovereignty, we'll just keep playing out the same cycle. So for over a century, scientists have searched for what they call the missing link, the bridge between primitive and modern humans. But despite these countless digs and countless bones, it's never been found. So instead, what we see are these sudden leaps. So you have Homo habilis, that's how you pronounce it, to Homo erectus. Then suddenly, Homo sapiens, with a brain capacity, and symbolic language and culture that appears pretty much overnight, not that gradual slope. Darwin's theory tells us this should have taken millions of years of slow mutation, but the evidence says otherwise. And even many anthropologists will admit that we don't fully understand how Homo sapiens appeared. So what is the explanation? Some researchers, including geneticists, have actually dared to suggest the unthinkable, that our DNA itself was tampered with. That humanity is not just the product of random evolution, but the result of deliberate engineering. And the Sumerians wrote the Anunnaki didn't just rule mankind. The Anunnaki claimed to have created mankind. Clay mixed with the blood of the gods. Beings who would serve as workers, slaves, and intermediaries. Let's remember what the Book of Enoch describes. Beings who crossed with humanity, producing hybrid offspring and teaching forbidden arts. So whether we read these as literal events or symbolic allegories, the message is still the same. Something or someone has interfered. And here is where it gets even more unsettling. As mentioned, in the 21st century, now we're doing the same bloody thing. We are splicing genes, editing embryos, inserting animal DNA into human cells. CRISPR technology makes it possible to rewrite the code of life itself. And during the recent, as described, medical interventions, which I won't name here for obvious reasons, there were claims, hotly debated, that new technologies could affect DNA expression, that we may be entering a new phase of human modification, not by gods this time, but by corporations. So, is this the continuation of the same story? First the Watchers, then the Anunnaki, and now the technocrats. Each wave shaping humanity, not for our freedom, but for control. Because if you can change the human genome, you can change what it means to be human. You can create dependency. You can create and design obedience. You can close the last door to sovereignty. So, what if this is exactly what the elites mean by the next step in evolution? Not a natural step, but a manufactured one. Not guided by nature or spirit, but by the algorithms and the patents. The missing link may not be something in the past we haven't found. It may be something in the present being written into us now. And the question is this: will we consent? Or will we finally realise and recognise the pattern and break it? And it's a bit of a reflection, a closing reflection. Maybe the missing link isn't some dusty bone that's buried in the ground. Maybe the missing link is the awareness that's been missing in us. You know, the recognition that our story has always been interfered with. So from the stories of gods of old to kings and priests to modern scientists in these bloody white coats, the pattern repeats. External forces stepping in, shaping, editing, enslaving us. They don't want us to remember, do they? They don't want us to remember. We are not just flesh and code. We are consciousness. And consciousness isn't bound by these ridiculous edits that they're doing. It's not bound by DNA or algorithms. It's not bound by these patents, these technocratic involvement. Okay, so they can alter our body and they can distort our mind through the programming that they endure and they put on us since childhood. But the spark within us, the part of us that projects the reality itself, that cannot be engineered without our consent. That's, in my opinion, the real missing link. Our consent. Our awareness. Our choice to say no, to step outside their version of the story and reclaim authorship of our own. The elites dream clearly of transhumanism, of rewriting us into something they control. But their dream only manifests if we project it, if we forget what we are. So, my plan is to go deeper in this series, but with that we need to keep in mind the same forces that once shaped our origins seem to be shaping our future. And if enough of us awaken and remember and refuse this new script they're writing for us, they can't possibly win, because the true story of humanity isn't just what's been done to us, it's what we choose to become next. So, that is the chapter they can't write for us.